Hi, everyone. Um, Thank you very much for attending our monthly Zoom meeting. My name's Stefan. I'm the Vice President for the Pinellas chapter of the FNPS. And I just wanted to, first of all, say as well that is being recorded. So if you want to share it later, or if there's something you miss later, you can definitely come back to it. I met our speaker, Erik Nobs, a couple years ago when I was doing classes for my arborist certification, and he was actually one of the teachers, and really cool guy. I'm like, oh, this guy's pretty young, you know, he seems to know a lot. And then it was only later on, because I work at Wilcox Nursery, which a lot of you guys know, he came in and started planting some native plants, and then, you know, I'm lucky enough to now have him as a good friend. And so he has a ton of different certifications, but as he'll talk about later, certifications are only one thing. It's actually how you use them. But he is a certified arborist with actual experience. The tree risk assessment qualification is pretty difficult to get, but that's very important for a lot of different cities to assess risk that certain trees will have. We're going to have some times we can stop for questions. Again, it's being recorded. We're going to have our information so you can reach out to both of us for more specific questions. We're going to be talking about those beautiful, large, awesome things that we have in our yards that we talk about a lot and we spend time under and we hang out under and we gripe about and enjoy, but our trees. So with that, I will give it off to our wonderful speaker here, Erik Nobs.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and switch over to my PowerPoint real quick. Share. Very happy that you're all having me tonight. It's an honor to be here and to be asked to do this. So yes, I am a certified arborist. There is a chat function that you can turn on your computer. So if you have questions throughout it, it's a little box where Stefan will be monitoring it as well. So we can kind of go through questions throughout it as well as at the very end. So everybody can hear me all right, right, Stefan?
Yep.
Okay, fantastic, great. So yeah, so, you know, there's certifications, but anyways, that's me. There's Stefan before he lost all of his facial hair. So, but the first thing is, this is kind of, I wanted to stick with native trees in this presentation and their care. So the very first thing I always go over, which I know is probably bludgeoned to death, is right tree, right place. Anytime you're going to choose to plant a tree or you have a tree somewhere, it really should be, you have to think about where is it going to be in the future? What is the size of that tree going to be? How is it going to affect my residence or my dwelling, my building? How is it going to interfere with power lines potentially in the future, sidewalks, streets, etc.? So here's an example of a live oak. Some of you probably have seen this. This is in Safety Harbor. I've been able to do some incredible work on this myself. It's kind of an honor. But this tree is over 100 inches in diameter, and that is the live oak species. And most of them have the ability to achieve that size in time if they're given their full potential with the space. This is a perfect example of the right tree in the right place. It's far enough away. A few years ago, they put fences and things around it and basically repotted the whole tree to improve its actual living conditions. And after that, even though the tree is considered to be 300 to 500 years old, it began sprouting new leaves, which is incredible. And here is the same exact species put in about 24 inches. So you have the tree here that's maybe 18 inches in diameter. It does look like a telephone pole. You can't see any root flare because it was probably planted too deeply. And it's, if you notice on this, it's actually from around this area, it's pushing the whole sidewalk up already, which is a common thing, which way neighborhoods were planted back in the 1950s. And it's going on all over our communities, especially here in Pinellas County. And then when you call a sidewalk company in and they have a tree that's in this area and they say, put sidewalks flat again, what they do is they come shave a complete side of a roots off, which then just creates a new risk of one type or another. which is never an idea of what we want. So that is why we choose right tree, right place from the beginning. But one of the things I really want to speak about is I have a different view of the urban forest, and a lot of this has to do with my own studies in the past, is what is the urban forest? It's not just the trees, it's all the plants we have, the bugs, it's also the streets, the animals, your mailbox, your patio, your buildings, your homes, and you're part of the urban forest, in fact. So we have to take a holistic view of everything in this photo, including the fella down here, the quartz down here, as well as this whole city. That's part of the urban forest. So we're thinking about that. We have to look at all the benefits of urban trees. So yes, there are different things of risks with them, but also the fact is it says an acre of trees to offset the carbon dioxide produced by driving an average car 26,000 miles. That's pretty crazy to me. So the net cooling of a young, healthy tree is equivalent to 10 room-sized air conditioners. Or even the fact that roads have a 20% shade, have a 60% reduction in resurfacing costs over 30 years. So if we're planting more trees and we're putting up there, we're also maintaining our hardscapes and have to pay less tax dollars to improve even our own roads, which is very interesting always to me. And the power of our urban forests is huge. You know, we should know, or we do know, that they do create oxygen for us. They absorb heat so it stays cooler in an area. It captures air pollution. In areas where there's more trees planted in a downtown area, it helps boost retail sales. I would much rather shop in a small downtown area that has trees covered where I can sit under a bench and eat an ice cream with my family during the day. And that's just kind of the, it's a little soapbox subject for me, but that is the urban forest. And we should be starting to think of it more holistically in general. But when it comes to tree selection, I know we already have trees a lot of times planted in our yards already. And a lot of questions I get of what trees should I plant, especially when it comes to right-of-ways or close to your houses, or if you have a small yard. And I've put together a selection of smaller and medium to larger trees that are all native to our area in Florida. So I write small-ish trees because a small or small-ish tree is, we're going from basically 30-foot spreading canopy to 30-foot height with these trees right here. And some of them seem more like they're shrubs, but arboriculture is a study of trees and woody plants. And technically, you're all arborists if you ever go and decide to trim your tree or trim your woody plant. But some of the species that are native, and they're very great species and great for planting in smaller spaces because they're not going to create as much root damage or anything else, are these here. We have Yopon holly, silver buttonwood, the Chickasaw plum, the stoppers, these elms, firebush, elderberry. But we're going to go through each one here with some photos so you can see what they look like. But here's a Yopon holly. And there is this variety, and there's also a weeping variety as well. And these varieties are, I think they're beautiful trees. You can also make tea out of them. Actually, it's the plant with the highest caffeine level that you can have out of their leaves. Then we have silver buttonwoods, which we're seeing a lot more of these planted in parking lots now, which you can see in this bottom left picture right here. So, and they do extremely well versus putting a live oak in a parking lot, which is going to destroy it in time. And they do well next to a house too. You can see how closely it's planted, and it's doing well overall. We have our Chickasaw plum, which I think is absolutely beautiful. I actually have one of those in my neighbor's yard. We have the flatwoods plum, again, another beautiful choice. A sweet acacia. These are absolutely gorgeous. It's a great specimen tree to have in your yard. The winged elm, or a lot of times I think they call them Chinese winged elms or something like that. We have our stoppers, which we have our Simpson stopper here on the left. We have our Spanish stopper here on the right. We have our, I think it's white stopper, right, Stefan?
Yep, white stopper.
White stopper, and then we have our redberry stopper. So they can all, a lot of us look at these sometimes as even bushes, but they're actually really can be grown into beautiful trees. Or even a fire bush. You know, a lot of us use them because they're a great butterfly attractor and pollinator, but they can be grown into a beautiful tree if managed correctly. Elderberries, one of my favorites, actually. I know Stefan has one in his backyard. I'm a little jealous. So those are our smaller trees. So those are going to be for our smaller spaces, our smaller yards, our right-of-way trees, our street trees. Those should be our parking lot trees. They do have the ability to create a bit of shade as well because of their ability to, you know, grow a decent canopy, and you can manage it correctly. And then we have our medium to large size trees, you know, our red cedars, our bald and pond cypress, gumbo limbo, a little farther south, longleaf pines, which they're doing. Actually, a close friend, I was at his farm last week helping him with a controlled burn for his longleaf pine farm. Slash pine, red maple, live oak, which we have quite a few of those everywhere. Sycamore, Florida elms, and sweet gums. Here's an example of our southern red cedars. A lot of times we only see them ever get this big. We rarely ever see them get as large as this because they get cut down too soon. So here's one, and here's a perfect example of right tree, wrong place because of our power lines right here. Bald cypress, pond cypress. If you want a cypress, it's actually, there's studies on cypresses that they could actually do very well in a right-of-way area versus like a live oak. And the bald cypress, if it's not in a very wet area, will push up less knuckles, or, you know, and where the pond cypress will push up more. So this is one you potentially could use as a right-of-way tree if you have a right-of-way that's, let's say, over 30 inches. And we have gumbo lumbo. We're going to see more of these south of Sarasota area. Absolutely beautiful. I wish I could plant one in my yard, but I live in Clearwater. Longleaf pine. Absolutely need to have more of these everywhere. Our slash pine, our Pinus eliati, one of my favorite trees as well. You know, Pinellas County, if most of you are from there, was based on pines, Pine Ellis County. I learned that actually from Stefan. Our red maples, these can actually do it really well if you give them the right space and you care for them correctly. And our live oaks, which is considered to be 60 to 70% of our canopy within the Pinellas, Pasco, Hillsborough area. I love this tree. It's amazing. I actually have like around a 45-inch DBH, which is diameter at breast height, in my front yard, but we plant these too much as our shade trees. Even though they're beautiful, majestic, and wonderful, when you start planting some of our other species as well. Sycamores, great tree, one of my favorites. This actually, it's funny, this one on the right looks like it's actually been way over pruned at one point or another. Our Florida elm, absolutely beautiful, need more of these. I rarely see them actually. Our sweet gums, I know a lot of us don't like them because when you walk out in your bare feet, they have those little sticky, strongly painful things that you step on. They're almost as bad as Legos. Anyways, so when you're choosing your tree at the nursery, to me, it's first you need to choose the right nursery. You know, lots of people will buy trees from Lowe's and Home Depot, or let's say a big box store in general. You know, and that is all right. But I think a lot of us have lost touch with the fact is, you know, only way you could buy a tree was to go to your local nurseryman. There weren't a ton of places that would actually grow trees. And I think we need to go back to the idea of go to our local nurseryman. We know where the trees came from. We know they were grown in Florida or a climate that was very similar to ours. So we need to start thinking more of that way. And I know a lot of the people on this call, you all think that way, which is wonderful. So I'm preaching to the choir. But really, the first thing you need to do is you're going to be examining your tree. And what does that mean even? You know, the easiest thing is you're going to look for healthy foliage. Does it look green, or does it look the way it's supposed to during this season of the year? And talk with your nurseryman, talk with the representatives there. Start asking questions about the different trees. Ask them about the sizes. Ask them about the shade or sun requirements. Ask them about the water requirements. Ask them about, like, you know, is it going to grow all the way to the ground? How should I prune it? You know, and hopefully that person should know a decent amount of information. You're going to be looking at your tree structure. Does it have a good central leader, which is, you know, does it have a good, you know, here's a central leader, right, on a tree. So technically, the best form of a tree looks like a Christmas tree to start with. But we want to have one of these big things. We don't want to have another one here. you know, and another one here. So we want this one right here most of the time. And then we want good branches coming off it at different intervals. So that way it's not going to be crossing and having problems in time. Otherwise, we have to requires more pruning from the beginning stage. So we're going to dig into the root ball. We're going to look at those roots. We're going to see, does it have a good root structure? We're going to go over these things. So here's the talking to your nurseryman. So I just found this stock photo and I thrown my face and Stefan's face on it from a different presentation we did at Sunken Gardens, and I don't know, made me chuckle a little bit. Apparently we were talking about geraniums in this photo, not trees. But here's an example of when I was going over checking the roots on a longleaf pine right here. And here's a tree that even though it was a baby, the roots were very matted and very girdled, which we're gonna go over a little bit more. But it was helping these people, even though they were at Sunken Gardens, because we had a couple extras left over, of how do we take care of this tree? What do we do? Can we correct it? So I talked about structure a second ago when I drew it, but here is a good structure right here. We have this strong central leader, right? Goes up and down. We have good sized branches here and here and here. So this one right here, we may eventually get rid of because it's kind of an upright growth, but just good setup right here. And then we have one here where here's our central leader, which we like, you know, but remember, if we want to get a triangle shape, we're going to have to start working with this tree. So this branch here and this branch here very soon are going to have to be cut back because we want to have them not competing. And the reason why we don't want to do that is when you have large branches that are similar sizes and they start competing, they will grow close together and the bark will begin growing close together and actually push the limbs apart, which is not good because then we end up having failures. They don't do as well as storms or hurricanes. It's a, you know, our pandemic we have in Florida. But this is what I mean by a good structure of a tree versus not such a great structure. And then when we're digging into the roots, you know, ideally, which we're not going to always see, is here's the root system we want. We want bicycle spokes. You know, this isn't with every tree. But, you know, if you could have this, I'm drawing right here, you know, and they're going to curve a little bit. Oh, click the wrong button. That's our ideal root structure. Here's a tree that, you know, they're girdling around there. And girdling is basically a way of like choking. Trees are vascular system bodies. So when you are going and putting roots that get tight close to them, they squish or choke off the vascular system, which is the transportation system of water and nutrients that are going up into your canopy that make a healthy canopy. You know, they're saying, you know, this is not good right here. This is not, you know, this looks pretty good. And that looks good. And that looks good. That didn't look too bad. That didn't look too bad. But this guy right here, since there's only one of them, we could potentially from a young age go and make the correct cut, remove it, and potentially still have a healthy tree. The thing that, and you'll notice there's flare on this one here and here, where because of this one, it made it to where, where's our flare? We want the flare on this side too. Looks like we're also next to a curb here. So here's an example of, again, what we don't want. So when they put them in pots and they grow them in pots, they end up hitting the side of the pot. Like imagine we have a pot here. And once they hit that side of the pot, they turn. So they have no other way to go. And then if they don't shave those roots, you know, make some clean cuts on them when they're a young tree to step them up to the next pot, they will continue to circle and circle, which here is the pandemic that happens with doing that. So, and here's an example of, yeah, you have a root here that doesn't look great and a heat doesn't look great. These don't look wonderful, but this tree still might have a chance. Remember to make a cut here and a cut here. And we're planting, if we have a tree like this, we're going to shave the root ball, you know, with a sharp shovel with the idea of after we make those clean cuts on it, we give the root system a new chance to start growing out straight again. Anyways, that's my root soapbox. But next we're going to think about planting. So Always, again, remember, we're going to go right tree, right place. It's so extremely important. But how do you even do that? Well, before you dig, you're going to call 811. You want to know where all the utilities are. You know, where's the electric, where's the power? Even though this should be buried to a certain height, you should know where they are. Also, if you have irrigation or something else you buried in the ground, hopefully you know where they are, because, you know, they break very easily, especially if they're older. And even though they're not necessarily always a hard fix, it's never fun to cut into a pipe. It's know your species profile. That's another thing where you're going to be speaking with your nurserymen or your arborist or somebody who knows the trees, or get on University of Florida or Florida Friendly and know, how big do these trees get? How fast do they grow? How big will they, or are they going to damage your sidewalks? What's going to happen in time based on the spacing you need? Look up and around. Think of the future based on that information you just grabbed from step 2. You know, how big is this guy actually going to get? Can I plant him close to my house? I know I want shade, but, you know, if I plant him a foot away versus 10 foot away, yeah, the trunk is only going to get about 24 inches, but I'm going to have a huge canopy. I'm going to save my AC bills in time, but it's all about thinking what's going on. And then follow the steps for planting correctly, which we're going to go over next. So, well, that was just next. But I was going to say, why does this matter? So if we plant a tree too deep, or we plant it incorrectly, here's some of the problems we're going to run into. You'll notice right here, here's some synthetic strapping on there still. This tree also has moisture level, and we don't even see where the root system is right now. Here's one where we're going to do artificial girdling, and it looks like this thing is still in burlap right here. Here's another one that got planted. It's a decent size now. Looks like a telephone pole. If we would plant it correctly, we'd probably have a good root flare, which gives the thing a better way to stand. Here's one that looks like it's falling over because of something. And then we have more pictures. Here's one that came right out of a pot. It's probably already girdled. It's a good size now, but no flare. And we have these roots that are just all going around in circles. Here's one where we planted it too deep. That's probably a good, you know, I don't know, I'd say a good 6-8 inches too deep. Live oak, where's our flare? We want that flare. That's a stronger tree. Here's one where looks like it, here's the root here. I mean, that looks like a pretty deep, probably 12 inches. And you have this one where they decided to discover through probably an air device or shovels how deep it was planted, because you notice the original soil level was here. This is just an invitation for disease, an invitation for pests that you don't want. But I bet that's a good 30 inches right there. So they decided to uncover it. It's just, you know, look at that. Here is your grade. So it's kind of crazy. And this happens all the time. I see this every single day. And then here we have ones where somebody planted something right. We've got good flare right here. It's going to get stronger, good with the wind. Again, great flare. This is what we want to see in time. Same thing over and over. So you can see this one, even though it's a little farther away, it's got that flare to it. Any questions so far, Pinellas? We need to ask? Stefan?
It looks like, yeah, everybody's just enjoying listening to you.
Okay, great. Good.
Kind of going through everything. It's really good stuff.
Great. All right, just want to check. All right, so we started talking about going to the nursery and getting a good tree. Here's one of the trees that I bought and I planted. So this is about a 2-inch caliper tree right here. It's, you know, funny enough, you can already see there's a little bit of flare here. I love seeing that. And I really like seeing the roots, some of the major roots right away, rather than having soil buried up to potentially this line and then having soil to where I can't see anything. You know, imagine it was there. That's not, so that's why a lot of times also when I go through trees, I dig directly into them and I find those roots and I figure out, is anything girdling? Where are the first largest roots? And then here's after my tree was planted. So look, you can still see my flare right there. So, and even though the soil looks high here, this is just a berm that I created so that when I start watering it, the water kind of sits right on the root ball from the beginning. So now we're going to kind of go over the steps. So here are the basic steps that normally you kind of go through. And if you were to go and type in steps of planting a tree on Google, you're going to get 10 steps, you're going to get 12 steps. These are steps that are based on Ed Gilman and another researcher's information, which, again, he's one of my friends and he's helped me a lot with everything I've done over the last 10 years. So look up, like we talked about before. You're not going to just look up though. You're going to look up, you're going to look sideways, you're going to look backwards, you're going to look where are the hardscapes, what do I not want to damage, et cetera, and know how big this tree's going to get. You're going to dig the hole shallow and wide. You want to break up that existing soil that you have right there. So when that tree's root starts to grow out, it's easier for them to move through the soil. You're going to find that topmost root and you're going to treat the defects. So if you think about a couple slides back, where we saw all those roots matter on the side, now it's showing cut lines, we can treat a lot of the defects on the sides by making those cuts right there. And if we already have girdling roots and they're only a small size, it's a young tree. It's going to take cuts that are smaller cuts right away, doing very well and recover very well. We're going to find those topmost roots or the topmost root or two roots so that we know where they are. We're going to carefully place our tree in the hole. We're going to position the root 1 to 2 inches above our landscape soil. We're going to straighten our tree so it's up and down. It's, you know, somewhat common sense. If it's synthetic material, we're going to get rid of those things. Those never do well. They will create girdling in the future. We're going to add and firm backfill the soil. Also, we want to use the existing soil in our yards. We don't necessarily want to start adding other soils and different soils, because if your tree is chosen based on your soil and be in the right place, it should go and adapt to the soil that you have. It's been living in a pot somewhere or in the ground somewhere in a tree farm, and we want it to begin to adapt while it's young to your soil and not create some other soil that's not there.
Erik, that's a great point, and I just wanted to kind of mirror what Jay Cruz is saying. Any recommendations for sandy soil? And you answered that question that you need to plant a tree that's going to be happy in your sandy soil in the first place. So when somebody comes to you and says, hey, Erik, I want these beautiful trees in there, but don't I need to go to Home Depot and buy 100 bags of Miracle Grow Tree Plus 9,000 to actually make it grow? Or can I just plant it in this awful sand?
Yeah. I'm going to always suggest if you're buying a native species, especially that does well in our Central Florida area, or if you're in South Florida or North Florida or wherever you are in the world, you're going to find a native tree will do well in your soil structure that you potentially already have. But that's also why we're going to dig the hole shallow, and we're going to dig it wide. The reason we're digging it wide is we're breaking up the soil around it. We don't want to backfill it with soil that's not different from another place. We want to use our native soil that's in our yard. It is very important. So and that's one of those things is you're going to start watering it. You're going to start watching it. You could always do a soil sample or check your pH, but also any tree you would get, I always type in like a new tree that I want. I'm always looking at different trees. Can I plant this in my yard? Can I plant that in my yard? And I type in live oak UF, University of Florida. And then I read the whole data information sheet they have on it, what it does in pH, what it likes in soil, all the information about that tree in particular. And sometimes I go, you know what? I'm going to throw this plant or that plant in there, and I'm going to see how it does. So I'm not always, you know, I have a corner lot with a decent sized yard, and I have plants that I definitely have given to neighbors because I don't have enough shade in different spots. But it's use the soil that you have in your little micro zone of your yard. So hope that answers the question. And then
Thank you.
Yeah. And then we're going to add our mulch. And I'm going to show you more about mulching here in a second with some pictures and do's and don'ts. And then we're going to stake and prune if needed. Now the pruning, I really try to shy away from pruning right at planting because our tree has already been taken from a nursery in a different soil. I'm planting it in this yard. I'm going to water it. It's already a little shock. So unless there are defects on that tree, which means there's competing leaders, like I showed you in the previous picture of, they were all similar sizes. And even then, I'm going to make very small cuts. If there's broken branches, I'll probably cut that branch. But a tree at planting doesn't necessarily need much pruning. It's going to take about a year per inch that the size of your trunk is. So if it's a caliper inch of 2 inches, it's going to take about 2 inches to truly begin to establish and for the roots to begin to grow again. So normally I would say if you put a 1-inch tree in, wait for a year to prune it. If it's a 2-inch tree, wait for 2 years to prune it. Unless you have broken branches or you chose a tree that was on the sales rack because they couldn't sell it because it wasn't doing well at all. So, and then you just gotta take care of it correctly. So here's Planting Established Trees, Ed Gilman and Laura Sadowski. So great information. This is an article where I actually have a link to it. It's a PDF where you can read all about planting and establishing trees. And it's absolutely wonderful, free. There's actually quite a few chapters that they put together on University of Florida's website. I think it's around 16 of different things in regards to trees, even like what are the strongest trees in hurricanes, and they go all the way from a low to a high and intermediate levels where you can learn about strength of trees and information about them in general. So next thing is, so little information we already kind of went over, but so when we're planting this tree, you'll look on this left side. It says point where topmost root emerges from trunk with 2 inches of the surface. So they're saying, here's this. We want to plant that close to the surface. We don't want it down here. So we don't want it down here. We want it up a little bit. So top of backfill is 90% of the root ball height. So it's only to here, right? It's just about, you know, it's good. Here's our mulch, which is 2 to 4 inches. It's around the sides of the root ball. You can put a little bit here, but you don't want it right next to your trunk. So here's our backfill soil. I mean, look how big this hole they dug. So, you know, here's our root ball, and they broke up all this soil here. So when our roots start to grow, they can get through there easily. So root flare might be visible. So again, showing some root flare. So landscape grade, at least 2 to 3 inches below the top of the root ball. So, you know, got here and got 2 to 3 inches there. So, and that just shows, you know, basic mulching. It says mulch covering edge of root ball and not piled on top. So it goes to the edge of it. So it's not covering the top. Oh, sorry, my cursor. It's not covering the top. It's not covering like a mountain, which I wish I'd have gotten some pictures from yesterday because I'm in Missouri currently and the majority of the mulch goes like this on every tree. So root flare, 5 to 10% above landscape soil. So here's our landscape soil. Our flare is here, just a little bit higher. Shows we have an irrigation device. Sometimes your irrigation device is going to end up being your hose or some drip irrigation. So all this is on that PDF that you can download as well. And then it's just showing a couple ways that you can stake a tree. And not on every tree are you going to have to stake it. If you have a tree which is called either an FTG or a full to ground tree, which a lot of things like, I'm going to use a non-native, like a Japanese blueberry or an Eliocarpus. When you get that tree, it's called, so it's an FTG. You can also get it where the canopy is high. It's going to be, the tree is going to have foliage from top to bottom. So here's the trunk. You don't really need to stake that tree. But if you have a tree that's got a tall trunk and then has your canopy up here, you're probably going to want to, if it's a good size, like say it was in a 30-gallon pot, you know, you're probably going to want to get around some of these branches and put a stake in the ground. Because if we get a high wind, you know, you don't want to have it be pushing over one way or the other. So you buy a Magnolia Glenflora, you're not necessarily going to stake it. You buy a live oak, you buy something that has a good canopy up top, you're going to want to stake that guy just in case. So I put crepe myrtles in right before Irma. I put 16 in around my house. Not necessarily proud of it right this second. I could have made better choices. But I ended up not staking them. And then after, since they were only in about 6 months, after Irma, you could tell where the wind came around my house because they were all tilted to like, you know, 5 degrees of where the wind came. It was kind of interesting.
Hey, Eric, it looks like we're on this section, which isn't surprising. We got some questions.
Yeah, shoot.
and things happen. So we have a question. So do you tie to the branches and not to the trunk? How are you actually staking that tree? Because it looks like in some of these, it's actually strapped to the actual branch. Is that to the branch or the trunk?
So it actually ends up going to the trunk. So if we have a tree, you guys have to excuse my drawing skills. So, because it's a pointer and I have a point and click mouse. We at O'Neill's use some stakes, which are some nylon straps, and we go and we run it around the tree, and then it goes into the ground. So, and then because normally we use a 3-stake system, we will put the next one at a lower junction. So it's kind of in this union area, and then we will run it to the ground here. So it's not on the branch, but it's actually on the trunk itself. And we use the branches and the unions, which here's a union, and oh, what did I just do? Well, I just lost it. So, but imagine again. So here, 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 we have a union. We run the strap around that area. And, you know, then be another one. Because if I have 3, I'm going to go 1, 2, 3. So each one's like 33% around the tree. Or if you're using 2, do it half and half. But I know it's kind of confusing with this drawing, and I apologize, but it's actually around the trunk. And the fact is you're going to continue to check those straps, because the idea of those straps or stakes should only be in until you can go up and kind of push your tree back and forth with your arm, and you don't see the root ball move, which will be at least normally 1 year. And sometimes it's going to be 2, or it could be more based on the diameter of your tree. Because remember, I made that statement of normally for every inch, it's about a year of recovery.
Okay, awesome. Eric, thank you. And it looks like we had Daniel Pikulski raise his hand. Not sure what to. Daniel, do you have a question? All right, so Daniel, ask your question at the end. If anybody raises their hand, I'll definitely check it out, and I want you to be able to answer or ask your question. So Daniel, we'll check in with you at the end, and we'll see if you still had your question. Thank you, Eric.
Great. So next thing is cultural practices, which this is dealing with after your tree is established, after your tree is in. Maybe your tree's already been existing when you bought your house. Cultural practices, how are we treating our urban forest? What are we doing after our tree's there, or continuing to care for our tree? And it's, you know, what we do after planting, or what we do with our current tree, it counts, it's important. Which, you know, mulching, a lot of times we mulch every single year. How much do we put on? Excuse me, how big should it be? But I also think we need to start thinking differently as well, in our holistic view. Water, what does you actually need for water from like day 1 of a plant to what should I do with my tree right now? Pruning, when do we prune? Why do we prune? How do we prune it? And also we need to think about who cuts our tree. So it is very important of, if you're cutting your tree and you're able to do it, that's great, but you just need to have the knowledge of how to cut that correctly and how to make the right cuts. And all of that information is online for free mostly, or there's books out there too. So when it comes to mulch, we went over it a little bit, but you know, here we have a tree here, and here we have a tree here. I know I was showing this a little bit earlier, and I said I wish I had some pictures from my recent times here in Missouri, but it says mulch should not come in contact with the tree. You know, that mulch needs to be on the outside of the tree, and it's only 2 to 4 inches max of mulch should ever be from grade on that tree. You don't need any more. This is just, so what it is you can imagine, so we have a trunk here below, right? So when you have this much mulch, you invite moisture being held against your trunk, which then makes it to where it's just like if you were to pour water on paper, it makes it to where it can be poked through easily, cracks come through easily, easier for pests to gnaw on it, rodents to gnaw on it, which starts getting into the different vascular system and can start damaging your tree, which I'm going to show you some pictures here in a second. At the very end, I have the same link that you see from the Morton Arboretum. They have a great, incredible video on their mulching. The Morton Arboretum is based in, I believe, Portland, Oregon, and I actually lived out there for a while, and it's one of my favorite Yeah, this is what it's going to look like when you clip to the video. But plant clinic tip mulching, it's like a 10-minute video. It's great. But here's what I'm saying. Don't do this. This is not what you want. So this is just the absolute wrong way. Because you got to remember, here's grade down here, right? So our trunk is all the way potentially down there. I mean, that could be, 12 inches. That's a problem. That's not what we want to see in our future. So then we have this. They've got some shade cloth. And again, they're getting ready to do it. Oh, and then here's the problem. So water and moisture was held against it. We probably have fungus. And here's a tree that looks beautifully healthy, and it fell right over. You don't see that all the time, but the stress cracks and everything else I've seen with the recent trees is crazy. So, it's our mulch ring should be, it'd be great if you could have it all the way to your canopy edge. To your drip line is how we use it a lot of times, is what we say. But, max 3 to 4 inches, spread mulch to a diameter of at least 3 feet. And remember, it's 2 to 4 inches. I like 2, maybe 3 inches, Here's
Hey, Eric,
yeah.
we got a question about the actual type of mulch. We're talking a lot about the benefits of mulching around a new planted tree. It seems like it's better to mulch than not to mulch. But then in Florida, and especially in this area, we're lucky we have a lot of different options. You have thicker, barkier mulches, flora mulch, pine bark, things like that. But what about stuff like pine straw? It seems kind of airy, and I do know that people like to put a lot of kind of fluffy pine straw a little closer to plants. Do you think that's the same thing, or is it okay maybe to be a little more lenient with something like pine straw?
With pine straw, you can potentially be a little more lenient, but still bring it away from your trunk. The idea is we don't want moisture held on our trunk at any time. So no matter what your mulch is, it should never touch the trunk. And with pine straw, you potentially could have a little bit higher if that answers the question. Like if it were a little thicker, I probably wouldn't worry as much about that. My 2 favorite mulches are pine bark and pine straw. I actually have pine bark around my trees and my plants. And I think you could be a little more lenient with pine straw because it is airy. Because you have to remember, what is the purpose of mulch? Is we're trying to improve soil structure, nutrients, and things like that, and other factors over time of our soil. But we're also trying to hold more moisture close to the soil and have less evaporation away from the soil as well.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah. Here, if anybody can, give me a picture of their tree that is mulched like this, I will buy you lunch. So, but it's, here's a good way, we have flare, it's kind of pushed away, you can see the spacing, that is some other mulch. This is, this is not bad. Here's a really pretty yard. There's no dollar weeds. So I know they're using lots of herbicides in it. So pesticides. This is actually my tree right here. That's about, I think it's around 50-inch DBH. And when I bought this house, there was no mulch. I put this ring in, and my ring currently is probably, I don't know, about 20 foot across. So, I wanted more, and it's going to increase as well. But here's the next thing. This is the think differently about mulch. When have you gone in the forest and seen mulch? Yes, you see breakdown of different things, but we could start planting understory plants more. We could start increasing the diversity below our tree of plants that do well in shade. Here's the other cool thing is when you put those roots into the soil, they're not competing with the roots of your tree. They're actually improving the soil structure. They're pushing through, making it more, it's less compacted. Compaction is the pressing of soil to where it's harder and more stuck together, but they actually help the whole network of what's going on with roots. It works in a symbiotic relationship in a way. This is very similar to, I know I showed my tree a second ago, but this is exactly what I've got going on in my tree right now is I have this huge live oak and it says coffee trees or coffee plants, like shiny coffee. This is not competing with the tree. They're doing very well in the shade. This is not my tree, but this is what I've done. And I just found this image earlier today and I loved it, so I threw it back in. I have now more plants and understory plants and it looks beautiful, kind of like this picture right here. This is awesome. You know, I don't have to necessarily have mulch. I fill it with small understory plants. I have different levels. I think it looks pretty. You know, you can put in more butterfly attractors and different things and really just go wild. But it's just, we can get rid of grass as well by using those things. We can be more Florida friendly. We can be more native, you know, it's just, I'm a huge fan of it. Go ahead, Stefan.
Eric, that's a great point. And Sand said that, you know, mulch is also going to protect the trunk from weed whackers and the bark from weed whackers.
Exactly.
What you're saying is the mulch really should be temporary and eventually want that area to be filled with plants, which people should the weed whack. So that kind of accomplishes both of those. So that's a great point. I really love that. I really want to drive that home for sure, is that that mulch, like you're saying, is enriching the soil, but only temporarily. I really love that.
And I apologize. Actually, that's an important point I normally always go over is, so I have a lawn service currently in my yard. I used to always do it, but I put mulch in because I use it to protect my trees and my plants from the lawn service. Even though I say, don't come near my plants, don't do this, don't do that. It's more or less I protect all of my plants. I probably have, between trees and plants, something like, which I had nothing besides a large tree when I moved in. I probably now have 600-700 plants, you know, between everything I've put in, and I use the mulch as a protector. They're like my security guard for the lawn care company. So, all right, let me keep moving through this a little bit, maybe faster. So watering for establishment. So when we're first putting a tree in, because we're talking about putting this new tree in, we need 1 gallon to 2 gallons of water per inch in diameter daily on our root ball. We're going to do this for at least a month. If it's in the cool or the warm. If it's in the warm, whether we plant a tree in the summer, you might even have to put more. You're just going to need to go out there every single day for that first 30 to 60 days. Take your finger, put it in the soil. If it is dry in the first 2 inches, you need to add more water. You know, if you have a light rain, that is not enough water to water your tree. If we have a hard rain, it probably is enough. But a hard rain is, we're raining for 6 hours. You know, a 30-minute shower is not watering your tree. I consistently have clients go, well, it rained yesterday. I said, yeah, for 20 minutes. That didn't water your tree. So it cooled me off when I was outside working, and then I got warm again. Same thing with the tree. So you're not going to add the water if the root ball is already saturated, if you check it. But, you know, we need to communicate with our trees. We need to look at the leaves. We need to put our fingers in the soil. We just check our plants every single day. It's really, it takes me 5 minutes, you know, well, maybe a little more because I have a decent sized corner lot, but it's still, I check everything. I try to about every day. So after our tree, after it's been established, we're going to water twice per month in the warm weather or once or twice per month in winter for the first 3 to 5 years. In between years 5 and 7, we're going to water once every 3 weeks. And the thing is, if you start seeing something going wrong with your tree, if you're actually looking or your plants every day, you can add a little more water, or it's because maybe you're adding too much water. So you just check your soil with your finger, you know, if it's wet in the first 2 inches, you're good. If it's not, you know, maybe you have another issue and you just have to start looking. So, and then how do we water? We water with, you know, drip irrigation. You know, this is good. We water with a hose. We water with a sprinkler head on a hose. We don't water like this. This is irrigation, and now our trunk is soaked. That is an invitation for fungus, especially in, you know, our area of Florida where we're so humid. Same thing. Look at all these trees. So this is an invitation for disease. You know, same thing going on here. You know, you can change to micro sprinklers if you need to, or turn it the other way, and or change something in regards to, you know, put the mulch ring in, change your sprinkler, adjust it, try to get it down a little bit. So if you have grass, it still stays nice, but take care of your trees. All right, pruning. So when and why do I prune my tree? So the very first question you always need to ask is, what is your objective? Are you trying to increase safety? Is there large dead wood in the tree? Are there big branches that are falling out of the tree? Yeah, you're probably going to need to remove that dead wood. Do you need vision to see outside through your windows? Or maybe you want to be blocking light from vision into your windows. So there's functional goals. Functional goals are what you should probably always be trying to reach first. You know, the health of the tree. You know, anytime you make a cut on a tree, it's actually stress to a certain extent, mattering on the age of a tree. If it's young, it can take it much better and you can improve your structure over time. But if it's older, when you make those cuts, it's a little bit, it's just like us, like younger, we do very well with surgery, older, sometimes not as well. But small cuts with our new technology is always the best. So we always make small cuts on trees. Pruning for structure. If you're trying to prune for grass, you probably shouldn't have a tree because you're not trying to grow grass underneath a tree. You almost can never prune it enough. And then you're trying to prune a tree and then grow some grass, and then it grows back. It's a give and take. But anyways, this is what we don't want to see when we're pruning. This is a lion's tail, and this is a lion's tail. I'm sure you guys have heard this before. These are lion's tailed trees. Look similar? We don't want to see that. This is hat racking. Again, I've seen this all over in trees here since I've been in Missouri. It's kind of crazy. We don't want to see this. Apparently that's the greatest way to prune a tree. So, and this is the tree after it was hat racked and it's trying to grow back, and now it's got some of those, fluffy lion's tails like this top one on the left. So big cuts, you're just decreasing the longevity. You're increasing actually the failure ability and value of that tree as well. So I'm only going to really go over one of these cuts for right now, but the main cut we're normally going to do is a reduction cut. So we're going to use this cut because the idea of a reduction cut takes weight from the end of a branch, or if you have like a competing leader, like let's say there's a competing leader to that, we're going to reduce it back to a branch around here. Same thing here. That hat rack tree I showed you a second ago, that's real similar. That's what I would call pruning by the pound. Somebody goes, I'll take a bunch off your tree, and apparently you're going to pay them more for it. But, doing this work, or if you're making small cuts in the tips, actually takes more work. So this reduction cut is where you're reducing the branch length from here to there. You're changing where the hormones are here, and you're putting them into the new tip here and down here to improve the overall structure of our triangle that I talked about earlier. So, and there are times where you have to have a removal cut as well, where here's a parent, we're going to call that a parent stem. This is a parent stem. So this tree branch is coming all the way off to the parent stem. But this is the cut you're normally going to see or normally want with the different kind of pruning you potentially will try to achieve. And this is the better way of trying to do pruning. And this is the majority of the way that we do pruning at O'Neill's, is mostly reduction cuts. So to execute a reduction cut, this is one of the methods of doing it. This isn't necessarily, I could do a whole class just on pruning, which would take an hour, but we're gonna go over it quickly. Is when you're making a cut, you're normally gonna make a cut farther back at first, up here, because we don't want to tear the vascular material in here. We'll make a second cut, and then we potentially make a third and final cut to where it looks like it's a nice clean cut. We don't have any tears or damage right here. So it shows, again, here's, cut 1, cut 2, and then here's our final cut right there. So we keep what we call the bark branch ridge, or the stem bark ridge, intact, because this is a very important part of cellular activity that we do not want to damage the vascular system of the tree either. So yeah. All right, so how often do you need to prune? It's going to matter on your goals and objectives. Again, we kind of went over that a little bit. Anytime you would have one of us come out here, one of our arborists, is we'll go, what are you trying to achieve? What do you want? Why are we trying to prune your tree? We walk away from a decent amount of jobs because we kind of achieved the goal, but we also try to show up and educate the customer based on some of this information I provided today. So trees that are young can be pruned more often to create our proper structure in these formative years. So that younger tree, again, we're trying to get that strong central leader, good scaffolding branches, and improve our structure of our tree. So after that, you should only have to have your tree pruned every 2 to 3 years after you have the right structure. So you don't need to prune your tree every year. You just need to have your goals and objectives and see how you can achieve them with your arborist and see how that will work. And the thing is, when we're looking at trees, it's better to plant native. Don't do native, plant Florida friendly. call your extension office. They have tons of information too. They have lots of free articles. So does University of Florida. And the thing is, you're responsible for the urban forest. You are part of the urban forest, and you are an urban forester. So am I. It's all these things are part of it. And the fact is, on these cultural practices is, me being a certified arborist doesn't mean I would necessarily be qualified. And what I mean by that is, the certification to become an arborist is I can pass a certain amount of questions. And there are criteria to be able to go take that test. But I could be certified and still be unethical in the practices that I do and not follow the most recent science. I am constantly going to classes and conferences and reading and learning to improve myself. And I do work in the field and I do it outside of the field. And I want to be a qualified arborist that somebody knows that I care about their trees just as much as them. So, and the thing is, you can find out more about that by using University of Florida articles. You can talk to the arborist so that when your arborist comes to you, whether they're certified or not, you have the firepower of knowing what to talk about and what to do. So last thing is, and this will get shared as well, is just here's some links. Here's that link on planting right there. I'll leave this up for a second. Here's some documentaries that I really like that are incredible. If you have Amazon Prime, there's more that I watch, but these are great about trees. What Plants Talk About is one of my favorites right now. I show it to everybody. And I'll come back to this after I get through a couple more things. And the Morton Arboretum mulching, that's their link. I'm actually sure I can send this to Rebecca too, and she might be able to email it out. And UF has tons of free articles and information. So yeah, and that's kind of, I think I'm
Thank
right
you,
on
Eric.
time, a minute over. Sorry, I started to speed up a little bit.
No, that was great. Thank you. I feel like we're all definitely more empowered. So to understand trees and to select them, plant them, and to give advice where it's needed. But I just want to hop right into some of these questions that we had. There's some really good ones. So one of them was, and I think it's a great question, is so let's say I have a fire bush or one of those Simpson stoppers, one of those things that's really a shrub, or we call it a shrub. How do I start to go about turning it into a tree without, let's say, over pruning it or giving it a weird shape? Should I start young with it? Like, how do I go about that? I got a small space. Maybe I want like a 10 or 12-foot tree and I don't want a crepe myrtle. How do I go about turning those shrubs into a tree? So
you're going to, from the very beginning, you're going to plant that, I know it's called a fire bush, but it could be a fire bush tree.
Fire tree.
You're gonna again, like, find the central leader you're gonna decide to develop over time. Okay. And you're gonna slowly, like at the very beginning, you're gonna bring back what I would call competing branches away from that. Because what happens is in the tips of all of those stems, they are called apical meristems. It's an apex, right? When you cut in the tips of that, it transfers the energy farther back on the branch. It increases the size of that branch. It goes from primary growth to farther back, which you would call secondary growth. So find your central leader, just like we would on the tree that I showed earlier, and start removing the branches slowly back and start developing that main stem and using that one over time. And it's going to take some time. Well, actually, fire bushes, if you have good soil, they go crazy quick.
They do grow quickly. And another comment was, if you want a tree, just buy a tree. Why turn a shrub into a tree? Well, people have smaller spaces. There's some beautiful tree forms for Simpson stopper, for example. Another question we got is, what's the best indicator someone is overwatering? So let's say someone is obsessive out there every morning, 5 cups of coffee in, they're still watering their plants. How can they tell if they're overwatering?
Well, that's a good question. You're overwatering. Well, if you're overwatering, you're going to actually see your tree start to droop. It's going to droop just like it would be if it were being desiccated, meaning drying out. It's going to start drooping as well, because potentially you're drowning your tree. Crazy enough. Just like how trees need oxygen just like you and I do as humans. So if you begin drowning it, it will also begin to wilt. And the way you're going to find out is you're going to use your handy little finger and you're going to check if it's always wet. We want our soils to actually dry out a little bit. So let the soil dry out. I actually, it's kind of funny because I put a lot of plants in recently, and I go out and I dip my finger around every single plant, which is a little crazy. Maybe I'm neurotic on
You're
it a
getting
little bit.
really up close and personal with your soil. That's great.
Yes, very up close and personal soil, but I do love soil. But you're going to go out, and if you feel like you're overwatering, just don't water for a day and check it out. Start using just the finger method of trying, is it drying out? It's fine for it to dry out a little bit. There's no problem with that.
Okay. All right. Awesome. Thank you for that. So another question we got, this is a really good one. So solar collectors and solar panels is a new thing. So this is a classic, you want your cake and eat it too.
Yes.
I want to have a big, beautiful tree, but I don't want it to shade out my solar panels. So we have a question, can somebody top trim a longleaf pine that's growing and it's shading out their solar collectors? I would say no. What do you think?
If you top trim a longleaf pine, you will kill the tree.
So that's
and I hate to
simple
say
answer.
it,
Yeah.
but it's and there's a lot of information on pines in general, but pines are also very touchy. There are two separations of trees that are, so you have, I'm going to go down this and I apologize, you're going to not understand all this. You have what it's called monocotyledons and dicotyledons. So mono is 1, di is 2. So monocotyledons are palms that have growth straight up. Monocotyledons are also grass. Dicotyledons grow up and they grow out. So out of the dicotyledons, you have angiosperms and gymnosperms. Angiosperms are any tree that has an ovary around its seed. That is an acorn, because it has a shell around it, a walnut, a peach, an apple, and then you have gymnosperms, which don't have an ovary around the seeds. You have pine cones, which are mostly, or you have things like ginkgos, which most of us have never seen unless you've been in the Pacific Northwest. So, but they don't have that covering around the seed. And the thing is when you start stressing gymnosperms, they don't like it very much. They're like version 1 of trees, and angiosperms, oaks, redbuds, maples, all the other trees we went over are version 2.0. So if you start cutting the tops out of those pine trees, you're going to also attract pheromones and stress and attract pine bark beetles most likely, or Ips pine bark beetles, and you'll probably lose your tree. And there's a larger possibility you will lose it versus being able to keep it. And I hate to say it that way, but we had in 2018, 2019, we had a hike of our increase in the southern pine bark beetle and other bark beetles right now. So they really don't take well to it.
Okay, so don't mess with your pine trees, especially if they are large, mature ones. You might want to consider moving your solar panels elsewhere.
Yeah.
Angie said she's got a young Geiger tree. It's gone almost all yellow. It's still blooming though, and she thinks that it's chlorinated water. Have you heard of that? I mean, I know Geiger trees go through.
Where do you live?
Time where they lose their leaves, so I don't think that should be a problem. But
Yeah.
What do you think about chlorinated water?
Okay, we go chlorinated water in a second, but my first question is, where do you live?
Okay.
On the Geiger, because if you live north of Sarasota, Geigers have a lot more issues and don't do as well. Because I want a Geiger in my yard and I opted not to get one.
Okay.
But going yellow it seems like if it did it recently, that shouldn't be going on, which just means you might need more nutrients in your soil. Maybe there's overwatering. I don't necessarily think the chlorination would be an issue because you're putting the water into the soil. It has a great filtration system. I actually start to think you may have a lack of nutrients or something else going on.
Okay. So that answers another question there where somebody has a fiddlewood. It has some yellow leaves. Is that a sign of nutrient deficiency? And I would say, okay, what does some mean? Because we'll have people that contact us and say, my tree that has 12,000 leaves has 2 yellow leaves. Should I give up on the rest of my life? Like, no, I mean, it's okay if you have a few yellow leaves. I guess it depends on how much. So maybe that's something similar is the nutrient deficiency.
Yeah, it's normally when you start seeing yellowing of leaves, and there is a chart you can find, or I have one that I use when I go out, and I don't have another chart with me, is chlorosis is the lack of chloroform, or sorry, not chloroform, but chlorophyll. That's horrible. I apologize for saying it that way. So chlorophyll, which is, you know, the green stuff, the pigment, right? And normally it's not getting the appropriate amount of nutrients to mix with the sun to create the green it needs. So most of the time it's going to be a nutrient deficiency of one type or another. And normally what we do is when we're working with clientele is we send in soil samples as well as tissue samples into the University of Florida, which any of you can actually do. And they will send you back a nutrient profile analysis of what's going on with your tree. Because we do practice better arboricultural through science.
Okay, that's a great point. So if somebody has some nutrient deficiencies in their tree, it's kind of hard to tell exactly what it is unless you actually get it tested. It's a great service that O'Neill's offers. You can also do it yourself. Jan asks, Florida maples, what do you think about maples? They're supposed to be wetland trees. Do you think they're good landscape trees?
They absolutely can be great landscape trees. You do have to a lot of times plant them with good water. We have different varieties of maples in Florida. It's just, to me, it blows my mind that we have Floridas. I think one of the maples we have is called Red Flame, which Cherry Lake, I think, puts out. And I think you just have to watch them a little more. You baby them a little bit more, but we have a couple that are native to Florida. And as long as you have one of the natives, they can do well. And you're not wrong. They are more of a lowland water tree, but there are some that do well with a little bit drier soil and our sandy soil as well. Just don't buy yours from Lowe's or Home Depot.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point. I personally love Florida maples, and I do see them now planted much more in drier sites. Just because something is a wetland tree doesn't necessarily mean it needs to be in a wetland. Cypress is a great example. They're planted in a lot of spaces where they're not necessarily wet all the time. And then we had somebody say in some northern states, topping a tree is actually illegal. Is that something that maybe Florida needs to, in the future, you know, add more legislation to make some of these detrimental tree practices a thing of the past?
Well, actually, based on your municipality, it is finable. It absolutely is finable based on some of the codes. Safety Harbor, Dunedin, Clearwater, Hillsborough County, most of it. If they catch the person topping it or the homeowner, a lot of times they will fine them. So it's mostly written into our codes and they're only improving, but a lot of times what will occur is unless they catch the person in the act of doing it, a fine is not given.
Okay, so it kind of comes down to that the personal responsibility of hiring a good company, and
Yes.
and if somebody doesn't know, then friendly education is always helpful. Ginger asked, I'm not 100% understanding it, but the vertical height of the under canopy, does it grow as the tree grows, and do you need to prune to create an under canopy? Do you know what that question means?
Under canopy of different plants or the trees
to walk under it. Okay, so she's saying essentially to walk under it. So to be able to walk under something, is that going to naturally fall off or get taller as the tree gets bigger, or is that something that we should prune for?
Yeah, so once, you know, the branches that are down lower are always going to be there unless you prune them back. And the idea of when you prune a tree for structure, I'm just going to kind of go over this because it makes sense, is when you leave lower branches at the very beginning of a tree's life, it actually helps keep nutrients closer to the trunk to help create part of the root flare on the bottom. But you can make reductions on them. You can actually make heading cuts on those. That's a good place of where it's a good example of making good heading cuts, because you will have an eventual height that you want to walk under, but you want to make those cuts when they're smaller branches still. So it's done gradually over time. And you have to also remember, you never really want to take up more than 25% of a branch at any time, or 25% of the entire canopy at any time, because all those cuts create stress upon the tree. So if you can make smaller cuts and then bring them back over years, that is the better way to go, because you have your eventual canopy height you're going to create in time.
That's a great point. I really like that. Okay, that answers that question for sure. And then a few other comments we had. Somebody had mentioned maples raising sidewalks, and that University of Florida is warning about maples raising sidewalks. Is that something specifically maples do, or is it just more about where you actually plant a tree? If you plant it 2 feet from the sidewalk, isn't it going to raise it anyway?
Yeah, you have a very high chance that it will raise it anyways if you're that close to it. And different species react in different ways. And there are ways to plant the things too. And there's other, if you're planting a tree that's, well, you should never plant really close to a sidewalk anyways. It's just okay, let me just check that box. So, but if you're planting in a small area, you need to stick with something that is smaller and less aggressive on the root system. Maples are a fast grower and they can have potentially an aggressive root system within the first 3 to 4 feet. So they can get big. So it is considered a larger tree.
Okay, awesome. All right. So just kind of, again, going back to that right plant, right place. And if it has to be planted next to a sidewalk, potentially plant something like that, silver buttonwood or Simpson stopper, which I would love cities to be doing more. And speaking on cities and municipalities, Jan and Rebecca and a couple of folks I'm sure are very interested in it. What municipalities, in your experience, I know you live in Clearwater, obviously, have the best or worst tree ordinances, and that could be anywhere, whatever experience you have in the Tampa Bay area or even beyond.
So Sarasota has an incredible tree ordinance. The city of Sarasota County is pretty good. Hillsborough County is a little more lax, but it's still very good. Tampa, very strong ordinance, as is Sarasota. Clearwater's is only getting stronger over time. Dunedin has a great city arborist. Theirs is becoming stronger and stronger all the time. Safety Harbor really began building on their ordinances in the last 3 to 5 years. Very incredibly strong. The county is decently strong. They're always improving it. For Pinellas County, Pasco, they just did an update of theirs. I like where they're going. It probably will take more improvement over time. But again, these are to me, a code is a living, breathing thing that has a lot to do with the people who live in the community. And the reason why Tampa's is so strong is because it's been strong for a very long time. They want to keep their canopy. Having a good canopy in your area and a good landscape, especially within your local neighborhood and close by, can increase property values from 7 to 15%. But that's not just if you're the microcosm and you're the only one that has the incredible, your house is going to sell faster, but your value may not come up. But if it's your whole community is doing that, or your whole neighborhood of 10, 15 blocks, you're going to be living in more desirable 15 blocks with a higher property value of that higher end of that 7 to 15%.
Okay, so it's something that kind of feeds into itself over generations, as larger, more mature trees and canopies are generally in neighborhoods that are have better value, and that value is also because of those canopies. So it kind of has continued itself.
Exactly. And it has to do with, you plant something now for generations to follow. It's you want to be planting now for somebody else to sit under the tree many years from now. You want your children, your children's children, whether they live in the area or not, or other people's children, to enjoy that. But that's not just trees. That's trees, that's understory plants, that's hedges, that's well-maintained areas. It's yeah,
that's great. And Rebecca did mention that Dunedin is rabid about protecting trees. They're foaming at the mouth to protect their trees.
Yes.
I love that. That's great. And that's awesome to see. So Dunedin, Safety Harbor, Clearwater, Tampa. I grew up in Largo. Largo does well too, but we can all get better on it. So also got a question from Michelle Lamoth. Thanks for your question. She said, with regards to shrubs that we can prune into small trees, so what we were talking about, how far away from a structure do you recommend planting it? So something like a firebush or a Simpson stopper. It's not going to get huge, but should there still be some kind of rule of how far away from a house to be?
Well, and normally, what I would do with something like that is, I think a firebush is normally not going to get a whole lot more than 5 foot wide. Am I right, Stefan?
It can get quite wide. It can actually about 10, 12 feet wide. So they can get pretty wide.
Okay, so look at the idea of how big you want your canopy to be, but the main trunk is probably not going to end up being gigantic. I guess it could be.
No. It's maybe if you got a foot diameter on a firebush, that's a gigantic firebush.
Okay, so that's a great way to put it. So let's say you have a foot on the diameter of a firebush. You normally want to plant it, in my opinion, about double the size of what the diameter of the trunk is going to be in time away.
Okay.
So it's I think from Pinellas County a while back, they say to do at least 1.5 times the size of what the plant would be. So let's say your plant would get 10 foot wide. You know, you should actually be 10 foot away from your property, you know, meaning your dwelling.
Okay.
But it's a give and take. And you know, how is your foundation built? Are you on pier and lintel? Are you, you know, how is your structure built? With like a fire bush, I would probably plant it about 2.5 feet away from my house and not be too worried, because I'm going to manage it over time as well.
Okay, exactly. So taking the maintenance into account, how often are you willing to prune it? Do you have someone who's going to be able to prune it for you? Can you put it somewhere where you can just let it grow and do its thing and not ever have to worry about pruning it? Is obviously ideal, but we don't always have all that space. We also had somebody mention tent caterpillars in their trees. I'm not too familiar with this type of pest. Are you familiar with this one?
I would love to talk about pests, but I am not a certified pest operator, and that would be something we could talk in person, and I could show you articles and information, but I will not have that conversation online. I apologize.
Okay. All right. So that's reaching out to Erik another time. And then S. said Tampa has a great tree database with planting guidelines, including root and canopy space requirements. And she said the spreadsheet is helpful for selecting the right tree for the right place. And I just want to mention that a lot of those things are, I would have to say, are ideal to be able to do. Sometimes you just can't put that big tree in that space. It's just never going to work there. But people still do. They want those things there. So yeah.
No, and it's my biggest thing is, like, you know, if you're going to deal with a medium to large size variety tree, it's keep them away from your sidewalks, keep them away from your power lines, keep them away from your home. You know, I love the size of my live oak that I currently have, but even it was planted a little bit too close, but luckily my house is a pier and lintel, so I'm not too worried about it at this point in time.
Okay, awesome. And you know, again, I just want to thank everybody for participating, and thank Erik. I want to please ask everybody to take our survey. Tell us how we're doing. This is how we figure out if you guys like this, if you didn't like it, what do you want to see more of in the future? So take the time to take that survey. We definitely would really appreciate it. It's on our website at Pinellas FNPS website. It's also on Facebook. We're going to use that to plan to keep doing these things. I had a lot of fun doing this. I hope Erik enjoyed it as well. Thank you very much, Jay Cruz. Also, I want to throw out one more time. Ann said 4 feet. She says 4 feet is to maintain away from a house. That seems like a lot as well, but again, a lot of those could be idealistic. PinellasNativePlants.org is where the survey is going to be, and then Facebook/Pinellas FNPS. Erik's info, O'Neill's. Remember the name. They are an awesome tree service. They've done what he showed in the beginning, the Baranoff Oak and Safety Harbor. They've done some amazing things. They teach arborist classes. I'm the vice president for FNPS, but I also have my own business with Wise Hands. We do native plant maintenance, and Pinellas FNPS, please join as a member. Business, family. We're going to keep growing. We're growing a lot. We love hosting these things. Thank you guys again so much.
Great. And if you all have any questions, you can always email me as well. I have no problem answering those questions, or through Rebecca. And, you know,
please, guys. Yeah, Erik is an awesome resource, and he does great work. So if you go further from the question and want to have someone out who really knows what they're talking about, give him a chance. Thank you, guys.
Great. Thank you.